So, welcome to today's podcast. I'm Bill Cole, the president and founder of the International Mental Game Coaching Association, www.mentalgamecoaching.com. And I was the first person in the world to earn an undergraduate degree in sports psychology. I've been a mental game coach, sports psychology consultant with teams and athletes and coaches in over 25 world national teams, 11 international Olympic teams, 32 professional sport teams, etc. And I've been a mental game trainer for thousands of athletes, parents, and kids. So today I'm excited to have Dr. Carla Steingraber, also a mental game coach, joining us today. I'm going to be interviewing her. Now, she went through our program. We certify and train coaches worldwide. And Carla graduated at the highest level, level 4. So her title is Certified Mental Game Professional Coach, CMGPC. So Carla has a pretty amazing background. Briefly, her mental game coaching firm is called Everest Strong. You can find that at evereststrongcoaching.com. She's located in the Chicago, Illinois area, notably Northbrook. And she works with professional, semi-professional, amateur athletes, parents, coaches across the full spectrum of services needed for competitive sport, fitness, and recreation. And she holds a BA degree from Duke University and earned her doctoral degree in clinical psychology at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Carl also has extensive experience supervising doctoral level psychology interns at APA-approved training site, and she completed a postdoc residency in neuropsychology. Carla provided psych services across the full spectrum of treatment venues, including residential, outpatient, hospitals, nursing homes, weight management programs, psychology clinics, transitional day programs, and hospital ER rooms. So vast, wide experience. Carla's been a leader and continues to be a leader in the field. She was the president-elect, president, immediate past president, all those for the Illinois Psychological Association for 7 years. And in terms of her competitive background as an athlete, as a youngster, she rode horses competitively and won a number of red and blue medals. She's been a very good skier since the age of 5, now an advanced skier. Also an avid runner. She's run 2 marathons and is training for another one. She's also competed in a number of shorter races. So Carla, welcome to the program today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I'll just jump right in. I'm sure our listeners are really curious about this, but let me start off by asking you, what is the purpose of a mental game coach or a sports psychologist?
Well, as you can imagine, athletes are often looking for the next competitive edge. You know, initially people get into learning all the rules of the sport and playing and just getting really facile with the techniques. Eventually they start improving their techniques and rising up the ranks. And eventually they start looking at other things that give them an edge. Maybe it's their nutrition or some kind of a stretching program, some kind of cross training, what have you. And then mental game coaching or a sports psychologist really takes it to the next level where you're dealing with the nuances of how you're feeling on the day of an event or how you're coping with some of the grueling practices or with the competition aspects, et cetera, things like that.
Very good. So what are some of the common problems that come into your office?
You know, I've seen quite a wide variety, some which may surprise you. I've definitely seen it where somebody's so anxious that they're throwing up off the block at a swim meet. And I've seen it that they've been so checked out that in the middle of a wrestling match, they're thinking about what they're going to have for dinner that night. So it's the wide spectrum there. And I've also seen it where sometimes, especially children, have a harder time containing some of their outbursts. I know you and I have talked about adults who have had this issue as well, but sometimes the children, they obviously behave a little bit more childishly. And I've seen it where instead of shaking hands or giving high fives, the kid slaps the competitor in the face. So lots of different kinds of behavior.
There is a lot of quirky behavior that shows up when people are under pressure, isn't there?
Absolutely, for sure. Everybody's got their own coping strategy.
Yep. So talk a little bit about the fear of winning, which may surprise a lot of people to hear that phrase because they figure, isn't winning what it's all about? Isn't it all good?
Yeah, competition gets complicated for people, especially on a more psychological level. And certainly there are different ways to approach it or conceptualize it. But winning comes with its own consequences. Some people really worry about then having to win every single time, as though there's some kind of expectation. Losing isn't allowed anymore, or once they've achieved a certain level, then it's really terrible to lose. It's so embarrassing. Similarly, if somebody's winning a lot, sometimes they worry about their competitors or the people who might get their feelings hurt that they're so good. So definitely sometimes siblings are worried about outshining their older brothers and sisters or younger ones, or even their parents, because a lot of times parents are living out their dreams through their children.
That's really insightful. There's a lot of layers, a lot of dimensions, and all these relationships. But I'm sure you unpack that nicely. So maybe that leads into the next question. This is a big question. You can go anywhere you want with it, but how do you work with someone to give them the edge they need?
Well, certainly initially we have to do a little bit of an evaluation or an interview to better understand exactly what's going on. You know, the kid who's slapping competitors in the face is looking for something or needing something very different from someone who's busy thinking about pizza toppings in the middle of a match. Um, but so we start by figuring out what the issue at hand is and then approach those issues with some very specific techniques. And there are some that you can do just right away, whether we're talking about a mind body emotion scan or internal activation numbers and getting more familiar with that. And essentially, a lot of these things are being more mindful or aware of the state that you're in and harnessing some of that information to better move forward in a more effective and smooth way.
Great. So it sounds like you have coached parents and kids and teens and young adults and even coaches. So what's kind of your favorite demographic to work with?
Well, certainly the person who's motivated. That's that's always the person that's the most fun to work with. You know, when you have to deal with someone who's very resistant to hearing some of the information you have to share, it's a lot harder because first you have to deal with all that resistance. But the person that comes in and is ready to learn and try things, that's always the most interesting or most fun, especially because some of the things are a little bit quirky. People are often not used to coming into my office and bringing their soccer ball with them and showing me the way they're standing in the goal, the way what their ready stance is, or bringing their golf clubs and showing me their form. So sometimes people feel a little strange doing that. But the more they're willing to get comfortable with it, the more we can actually play around and figure out what's going on for them.
So since you're also a licensed psychologist, this next question I think is quite interesting. Uh, how would parents know when their young kid needs to see someone like yourself, a licensed psychologist versus a mental game coach? Of course, you're a double threat, but how do you make that determination?
Well, there are benefits to be gained from both or either, but certainly figuring out what the originating issue is or where it happens is very important. You know, a kid who's having issues with school refusal, well, they don't need to see a sports psychologist. They actually have to deal with what the anxiety is about going to school. But somebody might be anxious across the board in their sporting events with their coach, as well as in school. Or somebody might be having issues that are exclusively tied to the competitive arena. And that should help you determine which way to go, whether you first need a psychologist to deal with the issues at hand or whether a sports psychologist might be more relevant. And the two, while there's a lot of overlap, there's also some very specific differences. The sports psychologist is specifically trained to deal with coping strategies around sports and sporting events and sports injuries and dealing with coaches and parents and the children, and et cetera. Whereas the psychologist might deal with a wide variety of issues related to depression and anxiety and sleep issues and behavioral issues, things like that.
Really interesting. So let's say somebody comes in to you to work on their mental game and their sport. That's their idea. And you determine that there's a clinical issue. How do you kind of broach that material with them and let them know what you found?
Well, certainly, I find just being really upfront with what I'm seeing makes the most sense for most people. I think they find a lot of relief in having things identified for them when somebody can say to them very clearly, you know, this issue you're having, while it is impacting your sport, it is a clinical issue. I haven't had any problems with that. And I've had to refer people out to psychologists because they wanted to keep working with me on the mental game aspect of things, or we completely shifted gears and first worked on the clinical issues right from the beginning before we started addressing any of the athletic issues.
So when you're working with a child in their sport, how much parental involvement do you prefer? What do you see with parents? How do you work with parents?
Some of that depends on the age of the child. The younger the child, the more parental involvement there is. When I'm working with a child that's like 8, 9, 10, they really do need a lot of parental support. They might be in the room. A lot of times I've had those parents in the room and they're sitting off to the side and not too involved, but they're paying attention. They're collecting the papers that I'm handing out. They are the one that practices some of the homework things that I assign. And they help report back some of the things that they saw from their vantage point, because of course the 10-year-old has their perspective on whether the coach was unfair and the adult has their perspective. And so together we can really have a nice team approach actually, according to or to address what's going on. But when a child is more of a teenager, they obviously like a lot more privacy. And in fact, they can get very sensitive to having any parental involvement. And there you have to be also really careful. You don't want parents to be too intrusive or taking over the session, whether the child is 8 or 16. They do need to be able to speak for themselves as to what they like about the sport, what they don't like, what they get out of it, what it means to them to compete. If the parent is doing all that answering or way too much pushing, which I've seen before too, then it's not going to work too well. And you've got to maybe even ask the parents to wait in the waiting room.
So you've mentioned some of the challenging issues that parents might bring of a negative quality to the interaction. How about coaches? Like, what are some negative aspects of coaching that could impact a kid's performance in their sport?
Well, despite the fact that there's some really wonderful coaches who are able to see that each of their different athletes have different needs, some have a hard time with that and they can be very critical to the point where there's name calling involved. And adults can tolerate it one way on a sports team, and children have a harder time with that. It really gets into their head and starts to define who they are. It's a little bit, to them it feels like it's bullying, and they don't recover as easily unless they learn how to speak up for themselves or manage up, coach the coach a little bit in terms of helping the coach see what helps them perform better. And most coaches really want their athletes to perform better. So if you can catch them the right way, they're willing to hear that kind of stuff.
So now we come to homework, and I'm pretty sure that 100% of your clients do all the homework you assign perfectly on time, correct?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
a little bit of
That's just
humor,
my
but how do you?
clients, though. I don't know about anybody else.
There you go. So how do you assign it? How do you deal with it? How does it all work with your people?
Well, I definitely ask my clients, my athletes, how willing they are to do homework, engage it from there, because I find it unproductive to assign something and they come back with it undone. And now there's some kind of a power struggle, or they've got a sense that they've let me down. And it's really not about that. I don't need them to do their homework. They're the ones coming to me wanting to improve. So if they're not going to do the homework outside of session, then we've just got to do it inside of session. No, no big deal for me. It's really about how much they want to get out of things and how quickly. Some people are really motivated and they're just looking for extra reading, extra practice, what have you. I mean, Michael Jordan is a great example of somebody who always went the extra mile regardless of what was going on. And some people really, they're not chasing greatness in the same way. And that's okay. If they're getting what they want out of their sport, then that's okay too.
So I really love that phrase you just used, chasing greatness. Leads us into the next question. What are some of the do's and don'ts of managing yourself as an athlete so that you get closer to greatness?
Well, awareness is a big thing. Awareness of what your goal is and what's getting in the way. You and I have talked a lot about how people get in their own way, the kinds of things that they're thinking about that make them feel worse. And then they tell themselves not to think about it. And it just gets more difficult from there. Just sort of like the pink elephant, don't think about the pink elephant. And all you can do is think about the pink elephant. And also, I've seen it too, where people have definitely big goals, but they really aren't willing to do what it takes to get there. Achieving big things, it just takes a lot of hard work. And there are a lot of pebbles and boulders along the way that you've got to overcome and be okay with that. That's all part of the game, that there are going to be some failures along the way. And accepting those things can be hard for people. The most difficult client I worked with, it was kind of heartbreaking in a way because she was a really talented golfer, and her parents had invested a lot emotionally, psychologically, even financially in her becoming this great golfer. And she'd made it really far. And just at one point, she didn't want to do it anymore. And while her parents were aware of some of the anxiety that she was dealing with, they just couldn't understand that she'd lost the love of the game and didn't want to go with it anywhere, didn't want to compete anymore, didn't even want to do it for the sake of finishing out her high school with doing 4 years of golf. So that was really challenging, was coming to the point where she herself realized that she didn't want to do this anymore, not just temporarily. She kept delaying her decision, and also helping her really talk to her parents about it in a way that they could hear her and be okay with the decision.
And how did all that work out?
Well, it worked out pretty well. She was definitely much, much happier. A lot of her anxiety and depression disappeared after officially quitting. School performance improved, relationships improved, and I mean, the parents had to grieve a little bit over that, but she went on to do other great things.
Next chapter of her life.
Yeah.
So, talk a little bit about different approaches for different sports, different interventions that you use.
So some sports are really slow paced and some are really fast paced. So golf is a great example of a slow paced sport where there is so much time for the athlete to be thinking and get in their own head and struggle. Something like basketball, where it's going back and forth all the time, there isn't a whole lot of time to think. So it's a little bit easier to get into and stay in the zone when you're doing something like basketball or hockey. And it's a lot harder where there are these lengthy breaks. Football might be another example where it's a little bit harder unless the play keeps going. But, there are a lot of flags and lots of pauses. So you might have a different approach. And also, there's going to be a very different approach for somebody who's looking to get their energy up versus someone who's trying to get their energy down. A hyped up golfer might have a really hard time hitting the ball or hitting it where he wants it to go. And, a wrestler or someone doing jujitsu, if they're way too relaxed, they're not on point either.
Sounds good. So, how do you measure success with your clients?
We define what success is going to be from the beginning and what their goal is. And certainly that may change along the way, or they may add something along the way. However, they're going to have a very specific goal that they want to get this medal at this competition at this time. And we work towards that. And some might have more of a goal that's that they want to feel less anxious at meets. So it's very individualized.
So you work with pros and amateurs, and what sort of, let's say, different approaches do you take? Do they have different mental demands? Is there some overlap? Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, the closer somebody is to pro, very often the more they take what we're working on very seriously. They're used to being very scheduled, having all their practices and workout sessions and training sessions, even their diet. All of that is down to the last minute details. So they're pretty structured and used to all of that, and meeting and things like that, and even having things to work on, homework, etc. So in some ways, that piece of it is easier, but it's a lot more fine-tuned. You can't use as broad strokes because they already are so good at what they're doing that probably on average, their mental game already is so much better than the average person. And so it's really getting those last little millimeters of success out there. But there's maybe more coordination with coaches and other people that are training them to get better insight into some of these different things that are happening or going on. When exactly are they choking, or what exactly is happening? You might videotape them more. Usually the 10-year-old, you're not working on improving their diet that much, because who's going to control how much pizza they're eating on Friday? So things like that. You can use broader strokes. If you can already get them to stop slapping the competitors in the face, you've made a lot of progress there.
That's good. So our last topic for today revolves around flow, or the zone, whatever you want to call it, but let's say flow. So talk a little bit about how you help people enter flow, and what difference that makes in a performance.
Oh, flow or the zone. I mean, that's really where it's at. There are books written about it. That's when time stops and the temperature is perfect, and nothing, no mistake, nothing bothers you or impacts you. It's just everything keeps going. And there's been some really incredible research on achieving that zone state or flow state, which has a lot to do with perfectly matching your skills with the challenge that's in front of you. And that's when people feel great. And you can really even just tell if you watch some televised performances that somebody's in the zone and they just keep moving. Everything keeps moving for them. In terms of getting there, we work a lot on the mental state, and there's some techniques to work on pretty quickly. Attachment breathing, really, to start practicing getting into that flow state where you're starting to take your focus away from all the external noise and just being in that space, focusing on the ball in your hand and just being you.
Fantastic. So really enjoy speaking with you today, Carla. And if you'd
Thank
like to
you.
see more of Carla's work, you can visit her at evereststrongcoaching.com. Everest is spelled Everest, like the mountain. Great name, I think, for a company. And thank you very much, Carla.
Thank you so much, Bill. It's been great seeing you again.
Same here. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.